Hi guys. For those of you who don't know, I'm Michael and I'm the woodworker for MK Designs, and this is going to be episode 3 of the ice chest cooler deck box build. Today I'm hoping to be able to get it all finished up and move on to the next project, which I've got a lot of them. That's what we're going to get started on. I'm going to get started on the top and sanding it all down, and then I'm going to get the lid done and all the hardware put on, and got a lot to do, so let's get to it.
Okay, so like I said, the first thing I need to do is sand the box itself, especially the top. So I'm going to remove the lid and I'm going to start sanding it. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, why am I not using a random orbit sander? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, I didn't have any 60 grit sandpaper for my random orbit sander, and I didn't feel like going to Home Depot to get it. So I had this quarter sheet finish sander that works great. It really, really does. So I'm going to get started using it and get this thing sanded down flush and smooth. And we're sanding and sanding and sanding and sanding. And again, some of you are probably wondering why I'm not using a random orbit sander, because it'd probably be faster. Well, I have an even faster way. That's right, I pulled out the big gun. I got the belt sander. Now, a lot of people are intimidated by a belt sander, but the one thing you got to remember about when you're using a belt sander is, first of all, hold on to the thing, because if you don't, it can get away from you real quick. The second thing is, do not, and I repeat, do not put any extra pressure down on it. Only put enough pressure on it to be able to hold it steady and do what it needs to do. Putting extra pressure can actually cause gouges in your work and can sometimes ruin it. But other than that, it's a very quick and efficient and effective way to get things close to even and smooth down to where you can actually go back with your random orbit sander, or your finish sander in my case, and get everything smoothed out the way you want it to be. So once I went over the top with the belt sander, I came back with my finish sander. Again, I don't have 60 grit sandpaper for my random orbit, otherwise I'd be using that, and just got everything a little bit smoother and got rid of all the scratches from the belt sander. And now I need to sand the sides, and this is the other reason I'm using the finish sander. It allows me to get in between my support pieces, whereas a random orbit sander wouldn't allow me to do it and have to go back and use some hand sanding, and I just didn't want to do that on this project. And now comes the fun part. I made a couple of rough marks on two pieces of 2x4 cedar, and I'm cutting everything to rough length. So the next step is to take it over to the joiner and clean up. Wait, hold up, something's wrong. Oh yeah, one thing you got to always remember to do is plug in your power tools, especially in a mobile shop. So as I was trying to say, I'm going to bring it over to the joiner and clean up one face and then one edge. So now I'm going to take that face that I just cleaned up and put it against my fence, which is at a perfect 90 to the table, and clean up the edge. And I'll repeat this for all 4 parts of the lid. And now I'm going to run it through the planer. And this is a trick I learned. I can't remember where I learned it from, but it was on YouTube. It was one of the other woodworkers out there. Basically, you set your board in about midways, don't lock it down, and turn it on after you get your vacuum hose out of the way, of course. What you do is you turn it on, and then you slowly crank down, bringing it closer until the feed rollers pull the board through. Then you lock it and you crank it down one more turn, and then run your board through. And once you start getting a cut, then you can start running the rest of your boards through. So a couple of weeks ago, a Facebook group that I'm a part of called King's Fine Woodworking Community, all those of us in Colorado, we got together and the discussion came up as to how to reduce snipe on a lunchbox planer like this rigid. And this is one way to do it. You start feeding one board through, and then you can feed the other boards through along beside it. The other thing you can do, is you'll see me here do in a second, is I take my two shorter boards, I put the first one in, and then I take the second one and I butt it right up against it. That will also help reduce your snipe. And this isn't just for lunchbox planers, it's for all of them from what I understand, because they all produce some sort of snipe. So now the purpose of me doing this is not to get everything down to a specific thickness, it's to get everything down to the same thickness and to get it cleaned up a little bit. So once I get all that done, then I'm going to go and I'm going to cut it, measure it all against my plastic lid, and get it all cut down to the exact size that I want it. And then I'm going to come over and I'm going to mark the place for my screws using both my squares again. And then I'm going to drill my countersink holes with a 1/2-inch Forstner bit. By the way, those of you that are looking for good earbud hearing protection that allow you to listen to music or news or whatever you decide you want to listen to, these that you see hanging off of me are the Jaybird X3s, and they are fantastic. I love them. Okay, so once I have that done, then I'm going to take all my pieces and I'm going to glue again. I'm going to put glue on the joint here on the face grain, and then again also on the end grain. And then I'm going to pre-drill and drive my screws. And I'm going to repeat this for all four corners and then set it on the lid. Once I have it all together, I'm going to set it over here and I'm going to start taking measurements for the top pieces. I'm going to measure in 3 different spots, on each edge and then in the center, just to make sure I have the same rough length. And then next I'm going to cut the top pieces down to rough length. Now I wanted to slow this down and show you guys this. When you're making cross cuts and you need to set a length, you don't want to trap the cutoff piece between the fence and the blade. So what I do is I take a piece of scrap wood and put it against the fence, line up my mark, then lock the fence down, and then I'll take a clamp and move the scrap piece to the back of the fence and clamp it down. And then it's just a matter of taking your board and putting it up against that scrap piece and running it through. That way you have a little bit of space between your cutoff and your fence. And now I'm sure some of you have noticed that yes, I changed shirts and jeans. That's because this is actually on a different day. I started this on Monday and a storm moved in, so I had to stop. Tuesday we had snow, and now it's Wednesday when I'm doing this part. And once again, I'm going to run these through the joiner and the planer. Now, the reason I'm doing it on these is because, one, these fence pickets, they tend to be bowed and warped, and this just helps get them all straightened out. Plus, I wanted to make sure that they were all at the same thickness. So once I'm finished at the joiner, I'll move over to the planer. Now, as regarding snipe, here's another way that you can help reduce it, and that's to run your boards through at an angle like this. So what I didn't show you before on the 2x4s was this part. I take the edge that I cleaned up on the joiner and I put it against my fence, and in doing this process I clean up the other edge and get the boards ripped down to the exact width that I want. Now once I have that done, I'm going to bring them over and get them marked against my lid to get them cut down to exact length. I'm going to take them over to the table saw and cut them down. And then I'm going to bring everything back over and make sure it fits, and I'm going to start gluing it on. Again, here I'm using glue and 1 1/4 brad nails. Now the type of glue that I'm using is Titebond 3. That's typically what I always use, but especially for this project because it's going to be outdoors. And as always, make sure you use plenty of glue and put glue on both surfaces that are being glued together. Now those middle pieces that are in there, I didn't film putting those in, but I decided to put those in because there's about a 3/4 inch to an inch gap between the plastic lid and the bottom of the wood lid, and I wanted to make sure that it didn't sag over time. So once I have all the glue on, I'm going to line one corner up and get my nail gun and put a brad right there in the corner. Then I'll line up the other corner and do the same thing, and then I'll run the rest of my brads through. And just use a wet rag to wipe up the excess glue. Now I'm sure some of you noticed that I didn't get my finger out of the way when I ran the brad. That's just a mistake on my part. I should have been more safety conscious than that. And for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, I've never used one of these, I'm going to show you here in just a second what I'm talking about. So if you watch very closely, right here, if my finger had been there, that brad would have gone right through my finger. So now the message here is make sure you get your fingers out of the way before you pull the trigger. You really don't want to have your fingers right there because it's real easy to get too close to the edge and have it shoot straight through. So now I'm going to repeat the process for the center pieces. Spread on the glue. And drive in the brad nails, making sure I'm keeping my fingers out of the way this time. So once I have all those in place, I'm going to take my piece from my center, and I'm going to mark it to size, again using relative dimensioning. That way I can make sure it fits perfectly. Just like this. Once I have that in place and cut to size, I will attach it the same way I did the others. Now I've gone around the whole thing and marked a spot for my screws, and I'm pre-drilling and going to drive the screws in. Now here I'm using 2.5-inch deck screws for a couple of reasons. One, the length, I need to make sure it goes through my wooden lid into my plastic lid so that when I pull up on it, it pulls the whole thing and doesn't come apart. And two, the deck screw part, because they're rated for exterior use and will hold up for years. So here I'm measuring for replacement of my handle, and I'm going to drill a couple of holes and put a couple of screws in so that when I sand this whole thing, I'll know exactly where to put it. This way I don't have to rely on pencil lines because they'll get erased when I sand it. So here I'm using a VIX bit, that's VIX, and I'll put a link to that down in the description. But this bit will actually allow me to get dead center of my screw holes in my handle, and then I'm going to put a screw in on this side, and then I'm going to repeat on the other side. So now it's time to sand it. On this one, I'm not getting the belt sander out because everything's pretty well flat and even. I'm just breaking the edges and getting rid of some of the sharpness on the corners, and then getting rid of all my pencil lines before I add my hardware. And now it's time to start putting on the hardware. I'm going to start by placing my hinges where I think they look best at. I'm not measuring or anything, I'm just going by eye. And then I'm going to use my VIX bit again. Again, that's VIX. And I'm going to drill a hole so I can make sure it's dead center of where my screw needs to go. I'm going to put one screw in, and then I'll drill another hole and put another screw in, and then I'll go through and drill the rest of the holes and put in the rest of the screws on this one hinge, and then I'll switch over and do the same on the other side. Now, one thing to keep in mind on this is I've been doing this for a number of years, using these drills and impact drivers to be able to put in my screws, and I'm confident that I'm not going to strip the screw when I put it in there. But if you're not that comfortable with an impact driver yet, or using a drill to run screws, I would suggest doing these screws, any screws with hinges, with a hand screwdriver until you get more comfortable with the drill or the impact. That way you lessen the chance of stripping the screws out, because this is one thing that you really don't want screws to strip out on you on. And then I'm going to turn the thing around and put my handle back on. I'm going to start by putting the screws back in those first two holes I did earlier, and then I'll follow with the same procedure with the VIX bit and driving the screws just like I did with the hinges. And so here it is. Finally completed. Took me a little bit longer than I was hoping it would, simply because of weather and some other circumstances, but here it is.
So that completes the deck box cooler build. I'm not putting a finish on it right now because I made it out of cedar, and really you don't have to put a finish on it. I mean, you can if you want to. If you're going to build something like this and you're going to put a finish on it, I would recommend some sort of spar urethane, something that's outdoor, because it's going to, especially here in Colorado, it's going to get a lot of sun, and you know, when we get rain and snow, it's going to get all that. And I do not have plans for this. The reason being is because there's only one measurement that is actually almost sort of universal, and that would be the height of the box itself. What I did was I went out and I measured our gas grill, and I measured the top of the cook part of it, and that's what I set my measurement at, which I think was like 32 inches or something like that. It's 30 to 32 inches, somewhere in there. But other than that, the entire design depends on whatever size cooler you're going to use for it. I used a 150 quart cooler that we actually bought like 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, and we bought it for this purpose. So that's why I don't have any plans for it or anything. I didn't use any plans. I built this entire thing on the fly. So like I said, I'm not going to put a finish on this one. I'm going to let it age a little bit, and then I'll decide later on if I want to put any kind of finish on it or anything. For right now, I'm just going to leave it plain, and we'll see what happens. So that's it for this week and this build. Next week, I'm going to start something new. Hopefully, it'll be just one video. Actually, I know it is. It's going to be one. It's going to be a quick build video. Something I told you guys a couple of weeks ago that I would get to. And from there, I think I'm going to start building some things for my wife's craft room, and that's going to be an interesting series. There's a lot that she wants done. And in the midst of all that, I'm also planning on building drawers for my workbench here, so that I can start keeping some of my tools and whatnot outside. Obviously, I can't keep anything that can freeze or anything that's susceptible to heat, but I am gonna try and clean up some space inside the house. So if you haven't done so already, I'd really appreciate it if you go ahead and click the subscribe button down below and click on the little bell so you get notified every time I put out a new video, which I'm trying to do every week. And if you have any ideas or suggestions of any videos you'd like me to put out, and any projects you'd like to see me try and do, just put it down in the comments, and I will try to get to all of them. I really will. So yeah, that's it for this week. Until next time, happy creating. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Why can't I say that?